And good evening, ladies and gentlemen, in the Facebook and YouTube world. I am back after a several-month hiatus. I hope you can see me. I hope you can hear me. We're trying out some new technology here. It's great to be back with you. I took a few months off while I hunkered down with this pandemic. I hope you're all doing well and healthy. I am excited to be back on the Pappas Post's Facebook Live channel and our YouTube Live channel. Today is Giving Tuesday, and I'm really curious to hear in your comments what you all think about this special day of philanthropy. Millions and millions of Americans and people throughout the world have donated to their favorite charities, but we're not here to talk about philanthropy tonight. We're here to talk about something that Greeks have been involved with for a very long time. I am honored to host this evening the executive director of the Hellenic American Leadership Council, one of this country's most well-known and most active advocacy organizations for Greek American issues, Greece-Cyprus issues of freedom of religion for the ecumenical patriarchate, and numerous other issues of importance to Greek Americans. I am about to include on my screen none other than Endy Zemenides, the executive director. Endy, I think you are going to be on in 3, 2, 1, and here you are with your shiny bald head. So before
and all the color, right? I went purple and pink and bright blue in honor of being. I think you should call your Facebook Lives in living color.
There you go. With you, right. Definitely colorful. Listen, a lot of people know you, but a lot of people don't know you, and I want to make sure that people really understand the breadth and depth of your background prior to joining the Hellenic American Leadership Council. And I'm going to be sharing the link on the comments because I really want people to follow the good work of HALC. But you spent over a decade at the intersection of policy and politics, practicing law in Chicago, that wonderful city where people are encouraged to vote often. What's the expression? Vote
early and often.
Early and often. Yes, we'll talk about the election soon. You also served as a senior advisor for Illinois State Treasurer and Democratic candidate for the United States Senate, Alexi Giannoulias. We've got a lot of fun things to talk about tonight. Speaking of Alexi Giannoulias, Endy, you currently serve as a non-resident fellow at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. You were previously one of their Emerging Leaders Fellow. I'm thrilled with your background because you really bring a lot of expertise. But one thing that
don't forget that I subjected certain college students to torture as a lecturer at DePaul University's political science department.
And also, I understand that you serve on the board of directors of College Year in Athens, which is a wonderful program for study abroad, which is another thing that we've spoken about on your podcast. So you've got your JD from Georgetown. We won't hold that against you. You spent some time in Washington, so clearly you were tainted. We are talking all things politics tonight, and it's something that we Greek Americans have been involved with for a very long time, going all the way back to the right after the War of Independence, when I forget his name, Miltiadis Miller, the first United States congressman who was actually an orphan, I think, if my story is correct. But I want to show you some things, and I want to kick off on a fun note here. I want to show you some things, and I want you to tell me what you think of them. I'm also a politics buff, and I've got a fun collection of things here. This is going back to McGovern. What year was this?
72.
72. Greece was in the middle of a dictatorship. Yeah. Here's one that's a little bit older, I think. I think you'll get a kick out of this one.
I
like Ike. Yeah. So, of course, who will ever forget
Michael Dukakis?
Michael Dukakis started the career of many people that we see in Democratic Party politics today, including the Secretary of State with the incoming Biden administration, who mentioned that the Dukakis campaign was actually the first campaign that he worked on. Here's one that will bring back a lot of great memories for you and me.
Maria Pappas.
Maria Pappas.
This is the election, by the way, and that's the election that launched Barack Obama into national politics.
It sure is.
Maria was actually running against Barack Obama.
I actually have some old newspaper articles in my archive when Maria was actually up in the polls against.
She was first. So yeah.
You know, and just as long as we've been involved in politics, we've also been subjected to classic discrimination. And this doesn't go back to the story of the AHEPA and the KKK in the 1920s and the KKK burning down Greek restaurants. But we're going back to, if my memory serves me right, 1972, when a U.S. congressman named Nick Galifianakis, whose name was so long, he actually had to put his pins on two separate pins. Actually, I've got the same ones here. So we've got, here's the pins.
Yeah.
And something really funny here that you can actually tell us a little bit about this, but he ran against Jesse Helms. And Jesse Helms used political advertising like this, which is quite shocking, actually, in 1972 even. But tell us a little bit about this. What do you know about this whole thing?
So Nick Galifianakis, as for those of you pop culture buffs, is the uncle of Zach Galifianakis. Really charming guy for anybody who met him. And this was kind of a height in Greek American politics. Nick Galifianakis was in the House of Representatives at the time, and he was housemates with one Paul Sarbanes, who would go on to become U.S. Senator, one of the most successful and famous U.S. senators of our lifetime, author of Sarbanes-Oxley, and kind of the patriarch of a democratic Greek dynasty. We have two kind of Greek dynasties. One's Democrat, Paul Sarbanes and John Sarbanes, another Republican, Mike Bilirakis and Gus Bilirakis. John Bradamus, who famously became Speaker of the House, brilliant man who became president of NYU, right? NYU. And Nick Galifianakis, as funny as Zach, he would get up and he would say, you know, big, tall guy, Southern drawl. And he say, I'm in Congress with Paul Sarbanes and John Bradamus. He says, John Bradamus and Paul Sarbanes. One graduated summa cum laude. The other one graduated magna cum laude. And I graduated thank the Lord. So,
True.
But I bring up that humor only because this guy, and you saw it even with the pins, this guy was really good at retail politics. He was a charming guy. He was elected. And Jesse Helms, who some of your more younger or people actually our age may remember this, Jesse Helms famously ran against an African American, Harvey Gantt, who was a mayor in North Carolina, and his closing commercial was two black hands holding a shotgun. And everybody said, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe Jesse Helms did this." It's actually figured even in the documentary about the Bulls' The Last Dance, when they talked about the fact that Michael Jordan didn't back the black mayor. But that wasn't the first time Jesse Helms used race baiting. Jesse Helms, during the race against Galifianakis, when Galifianakis was up, was asked whether Nick Galifianakis was a Christian, whether he believed in God. And he says, well, he's Greek Orthodox. I think they believe in God. And then he had a closing ad that said, vote for Jesse Helms. He's one of us, basically implying that Galifianakis was not one of them. And he spent months mispronouncing. We saw that again kind of this year, right, with the obvious attempts and open attempts to mispronounce Kamala Harris's name.
Sure.
I think people were keeping track of that. Jesse Helms tried to say Galifianakis's last name uh, in as many different ways as he possibly could. So this shows that we were part of these chauvinistic and discriminatory attacks as well. So as much as we'd like to believe that we have been fully accepted in American society, there's evidence quite to the contrary.
Well, I had published an article a few months ago on the Pappas Post about some political things. In the middle of the campaign, I always try to find relevant content. And there was actually a newspaper article that I reprinted that actually went viral back at the time, but it was when George Bush was running against Mike Dukakis, and Loretta Lynn stood up at a campaign event with George Bush, and she said, well, how can you trust somebody whose name you can't even pronounce? And I mean, this is in 1988. What was it? 88, 80,
Yeah. 88.
1988. Yep. So you're exactly right. I mentioned a HEPA earlier, and I just want to throw a photograph on the screen because this is actually, I'm going to hide us for a moment because I want my viewers to get a good look at this. This is actually going back to 1924. And this is, as far as we know, the very first time a delegation of Greek Americans met with a United States president. And this is the famous photograph from 1924, President Calvin Coolidge. I found the photograph in the Library of Congress in the Presidential Archives. And we have been, as a community, since 1924, very active in the White House. Many times our community has gone in en masse. Other times only the ethnarch, if you will, the archbishop has gone in with a few chosen leaders. We've published this numerous times on the Pappas Post. President Trump continued that tradition. This year was obviously canceled because of the pandemic. What should we expect with the incoming Biden administration, Endy? And I know you've written about this, and I do want to talk about your Kathimerini article today, and I want to talk about some specific issues that you brought up in the Kathimerini article. But we've been hearing a lot about Joe Biden's relationship with the Greek American community. His personal friendship with Father Alex Karloutsos is well known to many, many people. His close relationship with many political families in our community are very well known. And that's all here and great, but we need more than cocktail parties and photo ops. And I really want to get to the core of what you're good at, and that is policy and what we should really expect vis-a-vis Greece, Cyprus, the Ecumenical Patriarchate. I have a lot of readers on the Pappas Post. The minute we post something about Biden, oh, ta idya patelaki mo, ta idya pateli mo, nothing's going to change. It's all going to be the same. Oh, they're all politicians. Nothing's going to change with Turkey. Is anything going to change? What's going to happen? I mean, this is
Sure.
our
I think things will change, and there's some things that we even seen that change, and we'll give credit where credit is due. Even we could talk about Secretary Pompeo today at the NATO Ministerial. But one of the keys, and I'm glad you started with the photo, and we should celebrate how AHEPA started this, because AHEPA became a serious player in issues that were facing American society. Remember what AHEPA started fighting, and it's something else that you talk about a lot every year, and you post the palm card of the Ku Klux Klan that actually ends with, during an election, when a Greek is elected president, the Klan won't be worth a damn. And AHEPA stepped forward in that kind of very ugly America, and gave our community a torch to rally behind, a flag to rally behind, showed that we as Hellenes, but as Americans too, were not going to, yesterday at the St. Andrew's Freedom Forum, Uh, Archbishop Albidoforos gave a quite an inspiring remarks, where he acknowledged that the real thrust of being American in America is to form a more perfect union. And it's the opening line of our Constitution. And, HEPA showed that the Greek community could be part of it. Archbishop Iakovos showed that the Greek American community could be part of it. Archbishop Elbidoforos did it again. And I think if we keep showing that our role as Americans, we're going to have broad access and be considered partners and not just some gadflies. So that's one. We should follow those examples. Now, in terms of Joe Biden, and I agree, we should not be setting our sights on just one photo op, an annual party in the White House, which I think in many ways it is more than that. Unfortunately, some of the attendees don't treat it that way, but I think it represents much more than that. Joe Biden is, we can get past who knows him and for how long. You mentioned Father Alex. Let's look at what Dennis Meal and Jim Chanos and George Souness have done fundraising wise for him. Phil Christopher and Andy Manitas and Mike Manitas have known him forever. So those relationships exist. Dina Titus was the first congresswoman in an early primary state that endorsed Joe Biden this year. So Paul Sarbanes, who we talked to, served on the Foreign Relations Committee. So we could talk about all the personal connections, but what really I want to focus on is on a track record, because people, they've talked about it. I've seen it on your page. Oh, what did he do for 47 years? Right? Well, there a lot, actually. When you ask the question, a lot of people who ask that question are doing it provocatively. They think it's rhetorical. They're saying nothing. And that's not true, right? And I won't go through his Senate career because he's been dealing on our issues since 72, which also shows how important it is for our community to engage. But if you just take him as vice president, right, when he had executive power to exercise, when he had Tony Blinken by his side, when he had Jake Sullivan by his side, what did he do? Remember, the patriarch came here in late 2009, and Vice President Biden hosted, in effect, a state dinner, one of his first, I believe, state dinners at the vice presidential residence. Some people may say, so what? You just said, let's not do cocktail parties. That was a big signal, right? That was a big signal. The Turkish ambassador was in attendance. You know that, Greg. I think you were there too. The next night, Secretary Clinton did that. And surprise, surprise, after an Oval Office meeting, a joint luncheon by Speaker Pelosi and Leader Reid, and great meetings across Washington, Turkey got the signal. And even though a lot of, we still fighting for that religious freedom, we got Turkey to relent and make some of our hierarchs Turkish citizens. Right? That's not the end game, but at least patriarchal succession was moved forward. It was safeguarded because of that move. They kept putting pressure on Halki. Vice President Biden went twice to the Fanar. Right? These are not things that are small moves, but that was that. Let's think about Cyprus. 2014. A lot of us were celebrating. A lot of the people who were asking you the questions, what did he do in 47 years? Okay, they were celebrating. Rightly so, Secretary Pompeo's big trip to Cyprus this year. But what they were saying was wrong. It was historic. It was a first. It wasn't a first. John Kerry went as Secretary of State. We know that. But Joe Biden went before John Kerry. And that was only the second time ever a vice president, Lyndon Johnson being the first, went to Cyprus. And beyond that, he went there and declared Cyprus a strategic partner of the United States. Right? And that kicked off a period where Cyprus was not just looked at in Washington through the prism of the occupation and of the Cyprus problem. There's a two-track approach to Cyprus right now. Cyprus-U.S. bilateral relations and solving the Cyprus problem. That started under Joe Biden, right? And by the way, with him in Cyprus was his then national security advisor and incoming national security advisor, Jake Sullivan.
Mhm.
And then when Greece was in the throes, in the highs, the worst of its economic crisis, it was Joe Biden and Jack Lew together who really put pressure on Germany not to kick Greece out of the euro, who developed a working relationship with the then Tsipras government, who constantly picked up the phone, who in August of 2015, when the Greek American diaspora, where the church was there, the Hellenic Initiative, HALC was there, AHIA, HEPA, everybody was there, and we got called in, and there was a chair there. Everybody thought that Joe Biden was going to come and do a photo op just to say, I spoke with the Greek community. No, he came, he sat down with us for over an hour with members of Congress, with the then chief of staff, Dennis McDonough, with the deputy, the national security advisor on Europe, Charlie Kupchan, Diana Dukas, who was part of the administration then. And they sat for a long time coordinating a plan how the U.S. could support Greece. And there's several journalists, both here and in Greece, who have written about it, that if it was not for the role that the United States played, and both the current Greek government and the previous Greek government will tell you the same thing, if it wasn't for the role that the U.S. played, Greece could have crashed out of the euro to much more drastic consequences than the period of austerity did. So he has a record. He has a record. Now, our expectation is should be build on that and do better.
Endy, and I'm going to play devil's advocate here for a minute.
Yeah.
Every administration that comes in, and I'm reading a comment here on right now from Stefan Kalogridis. This is about recognition of a genocide. Does Turkey control us that much? It's about almost 50 years of illegal occupation in Cyprus. It's about constantly watching administration after administration. I think things got a little bit hairy for the Turks, for the U.S.-Turk relationship during the Obama years. Obama didn't take too friendly toward the end. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it just seems like Turkey's position, it seems like every administration is afraid to, excuse the pun, ruffle the feathers of the Turks. And will the Biden administration be any different? And I think, if I may, you yourself even were a little critical of the weak statement of the Biden campaign on Hagia Sophia being converted into a mosque. I think, if I recall correctly, you tweeted about it, that it should have been a stronger statement. And you can tell us a little bit about that. So is that an indication that we're going to be walking that fine line again, not to upset the Turks? Or are we really going to see something different with this administration?
So I hear your devil's advocate, and I will raise it with this, because we always look at things from our standpoint, right? If you read the Turkish press, which very often we don't, we will read a snippet in a Greek press saying this is what the Turkish press says. But if you read the Turkish press will tell you we developed our defense industry because the U.S. put an arms embargo on us because of Cyprus, right? We developed our independent, and we didn't rely as much, and this is straight from the Turkish press, right? We decided to invest so much in our independent defense capabilities because the U.S. was giving Greece $7 for every $10 they were giving us, despite the difference in the size of armies and populations and all the rest. We are unhappy with the U.S. Position on Cyprus. This is in the late 90s, because Richard Holbrooke, and actually there's even a great book on Richard Holbrooke that George Packer wrote, our man, which is one of the greatest diplomats in U.S. history. And there's this snippet in it. He says he couldn't deal with Rauf Denktash. He just blamed him. Denktash was the problem in Cyprus, right? Right now in the Aegean, when we look at Kassiloris, or we look at confrontation in the Aegean, veterans, people who really remember, reported on EMEA, say, who's going to be the Richard Holbrooke this time, right? So there are times that, yes, I'm dissatisfied. I think the U.S. could have done more. and the U.S., I actually think, has given Turkey too much leeway. But we can't act like it did nothing. On the genocide, there's absolutely no reason. There's absolutely no reason that the genocide has not been recognized. Presidents come in, and one of the reasons that I think when you look at many administrations, a lot of administrations, let's talk about Barack Obama or Bill Clinton or even Ronald Reagan, they come not from federal office, right? And they're surrounded by a pretty sophisticated foreign policy advisor group. And yeah, the foreign policy establishment for a long time said, you got to balance relations with Turkey a little more. They saw Turkey as this great Islamic hope. You've seen in the past, even when it comes to George H.W. Bush, when you have a more experienced administration and a more experienced foreign policy president, they're a little tougher, whether it's on Turkey or Israel or anybody else. I think that bodes well from the Biden team. But even more importantly, I think the thought establishment, the think tanks, the press in the United States has figured out who Turkey is, right? Maya Angelou, remember her thing, when someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. Yeah, somebody has seen who they are. And you're right. Unfortunately, where I have to adjust, yes, it got a little harder on Turkey the last 2 years of Obama, but the first 6, especially the first 4, President Obama spoke to Erdogan as much as he spoke to anybody, including then British Prime Minister David Cameron. He realized it. He actually talks about it in his book. He talked about it in his last interview in The Atlantic, the Obama doctrine, that he was bamboozled, that Erdogan's a fraud, an authoritarian, a dictator. In his book, he specifically says, you know what? I listened to Erdogan and I realized, for all his talk about democracy and reform, he was uttering it only as long as it would keep him in power. So the Gezi Park protests and then the coup, or alleged coup in 2016, were a real wake-up moment. And it seemed to wake up everybody except, and we can talk about reasons for it, President Trump. But yeah, I do think they're going to be different because they've been different. Secretary Pompeo got up in the NATO ministerial and lambasted Turkey. Basically described him as not only an unreliable ally, but a threat to NATO today.
And Endy, if I may interrupt you here, it's quite a disparity from what we're seeing from Trump, who for the last 4 years has been praising Erdogan, calling him his best buddy, saying how much he admires him. Has there been a parallel policy going on? Is Pompeo running rogue? What's going on here? How can a Secretary of State have one policy and the president have a completely different policy, which is what we've seen in this administration?
Yeah, bro, there's a lot of speculation, and I can, John Bolton speculated both in his book and in the pages of Katimerini. There's more conservative leaning think tanks like Foundation for Defense of Democracy who talk about this. So the foreign policy establishment has seemed to have understood what Turkey is, right? And even the last holdouts, like the outgoing Syria coordinator and former ambassador to Turkey, James Jeffrey, who was, very much like, let's use Turkey as a counter to Russia. That's always been the most common thing, right? Turkey had a key geography in the Cold War. It's a key geography now, counter to Russia, counter to Iran. And Pompeo one day just said, you know what? They're not a counter. Nobody believes that they're a counter anymore. Let's not be fooled by it. There's piece of evidence after piece of evidence, whether it's the purchase of the S-400s, growing commercial ties, meetings to decide what's going to happen in the Caucasus, Syria, Libya, and all the rest. It's clear that they're not necessarily a counter. when it comes to President Trump, he clearly showed an affinity for strongmen, right? It wasn't only Erdogan, it was Bolsonaro, it was Orban. He apparently liked almost every dictator except the ones in Venezuela, Iran, and China. I mean, he liked Kim Jong-un. I mean, whatever. I think he kind of wanted to be like Erdogan. I think he liked that Erdogan imprisoned journalists. I think he liked the power that Erdogan's son-in-law had, and his ability to control a lot of the money in the Turkish state, being able to show or determine what corporations actually did, to be able to bully their central bank to do whatever he wanted, right? Even in the face of inflation, he was making his central bank cut interest rates in Turkey. Right. So there's a little bit, hey, I wish I had that much power. And Erdogan, because it wasn't only to Trump he did it to Obama too. He knows how to brown nose and play to the ego of a new president. And it takes a while to do it. But Pompeo was not fooled. And Pompeo, I think, because of Israel, because of the Abraham Accords too. Let's not forget this. We can say, he's sticking up for Greece and he's sticking up. I think the Abraham Accords are a very big deal. The states that made peace with Israel or came up to some agreement, because they really weren't at war, but the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain, they're also on the opposite side of several flashpoints with Turkey. Right. So as Pompeo is sitting there and celebrating his top diplomatic achievements and even some bilateral achievements with Greece and Cyprus, he's seeing a pattern. Everybody that I'm working with has kind of Turkey on the other side.
Well, it'll definitely be interesting to see. Have you had any experience with the incoming Secretary of State? I know he's got extensive relationships, longtime aide to Biden. Have you worked with him? Are you familiar with his any affinities to Greece, to Cyprus? Any experience that you can share?
Yeah, I mean, as part of this, and how can myself personally have worked with as part of the umbrella coordinated effort of Hellenes, and we've been meeting with Tony Blinken for 2 decades now, right? And when he was when Joe Biden was Senate Foreign Relations Committee and Tony Blinken was staff director, he was working with us then. Then he was Joe Biden's national security advisor when he was vice president. So met with him then. He was deputy national security advisor for President Obama, met with him then. I met with him as Deputy Secretary of State. And these weren't meetings, on the sidelines of some cocktail party. These were about policy changes, about trips to Greece, about trips to Cyprus, about meetings with the ecumenical patriarch. I think he had a few-year running streak on attending the PSECA conference, the annual PSECA conference, where he came. I believe he attended both as the Vice President's National Security Advisor, as the President's Deputy National Security Advisor, and addressed the conference via videotape in Cyprus as Deputy Secretary of State. So he knows the community, again, quite well, not only as knowing them through fundraisers. He knows them on a policy, because he was always a technocrat, right? He was a staffer. He wasn't dealing with us, hey, I'm setting up this fundraiser for you. He has dealt with the community on a substantive basis. He was one of the people who was briefing, judging. I mean, going back to your previous question, it was his comment his initial comment on Hagia Sophia that I criticized. I thought it was soft, and I did criticize it. But to his credit and to the campaign's credit, they immediately responded with a stronger statement from the vice president, or from the president-elect.
You're
right?
pretty harsh, Endy, I must admit.
Tony Blinken promoted that statement. Tony Blinken was in charge of foreign policy for the campaign, right? And the campaign came out with a very solid position paper on a lot of Hellenic issues. Tony Blinken criticized during the campaign directly and openly. He criticized Erdogan's stoking of tensions in the Aegean and Eastern Mediterranean. He criticized Erdogan's declaration of a two-state solution as the proper solution in Cyprus. So this is someone who knows. I'll tell you this, and this is not hyperbolic. And this is absolutely, and anybody, I'm free to debate. I'm happy to debate anybody on this. The combination of, there's never been a combination of president and secretary of state, and if you add in the incoming national security advisor, who know Greek issues, the Greek American community, and Greek and Cypriot officials like this combo does. It's not even close. It's not even close. And I think, again, that bodes well for policy.
I think we're all hopeful. Greece is coming out of this crisis with flying colors. The financial crisis, of course, then the pandemic hit. That's a whole nother conversation. But it doesn't necessarily mean that when relations are bad with Turkey.
No, on that point, Greg, there's another appointment, the Deputy Treasury Secretary, right, who was also in the Treasury Department dealing with international economic crises during the Greek crisis, right? So there are other people, not only at the top level, and we still haven't seen who's going to be the Assistant Secretary of State for Europe, but there are names that are going out there that are circulating that we're very familiar with. So the fact is, you may get multiple people in this administration who know the issues, the community, and Greek officials.
And on that note, we do have a question here from somebody asking if you know anything at all about the latest appointee. You've got a lot of press in the Greek American press, Jennifer Psaki. Apparently, there's a line in her Wikipedia bio that says she's of Polish, Irish, and Greek descent, and the entire Greek world claimed her as one of their own. I did my own research, and it seems that she doesn't have an ounce of Greek in her other than a great something grandfather or whatever, which I'm not one to criticize one's Greekness. I mean, your Greekness is something that you have in your heart and in your mind, but she's clearly not the Greek American that the headlines made her out to be, growing up in the Goya and being Athena and being Miss Ahepa and what have you. Do you know her? Have you heard anything about her?
Yes, she's not. But so you're from Chicago, and I think you remember when the Bulls first won the championship, everybody was like, "Oh, John Paxson is Greek," which he wasn't. But they said, "Oh, look at the names of him and his brother, John, Mike, and Jim. It's Yannis, Michalis, and Dimitris, right?" It's we're always desperate to find that connection. Jen has spoken about and she has spoken. She knows the community. She knows a lot of the Greek Americans in Washington. I know she knows the Manitos's very well, especially. She also has been an attendee to Greek policy conferences at PSECA, especially. But kind of more importantly, and this is something that maybe a lot of people are not going to advertise because there is, there's competition, right, between some journalists, but she had a very good relationship with the Washington, D.C. correspondents of the Greek newspapers and Greek news channels. I think that's the most important, to be honest, because she was a State Department spokesperson, and that gave her a lot of opportunity to speak about these issues. She was a State Department spokesperson when the Patriarch came to DC. She was a State Department spokesperson when Hillary Clinton was, forcing Turkey to turn its ships back from interfering with drilling in Cyprus. She was a State Department spokesperson when Prime Minister Papandreou visited DC for a bilateral. So another person who knows the issues, knows the players, and frankly, for the most part, I think almost all of them are the same correspondents today as they were when she was at state and at the White House.
So it shouldn't have been that harsh on her for not being a maid of Athena and growing up in the Goya. So we should feel like she is one of us and perhaps might have an affinity to some of our issues as a Greek American. Endy, do you have any insight on any other potential appointees by the Biden administration? I mean, there are numerous Greek Americans that have played a role in previous Democratic administrations. Demetrius Marantis comes to mind. Peter Pappas comes to mind. There were numerous Greek Americans. Do you know of any other people vying for any spots? I'm also interested to hear your take on who the potential United States ambassador to Athens may be. It seems like Jeffrey Pyatt's 4 years may be winding down next summer, and it'll be someone else's turn. Any insight on other major appointments in this administration?
Well, I think you have to wait, first of all, at the secretary level, right? So you're going to fill the cabinet first. You're going to fill the inner workings of the Oval Office, right, and the executive office building, and then a lot of people are going to be in play. So we have to wait to see who those secretaries are going to be. Some of it is complicated by waiting for the results in Georgia, right? If somehow the Democrats win those 2 seats, I think you're going to see different nominations than you might see now. There are people that
because the Senate will have to confirm them. There are certain people
the Senate would have to confirm them. So if the Democrats can confirm. If the Democrats can confirm with the tie-breaking vote of Vice President-elect Harris, it's a different ball game than if it's you got to get someone who needs at least a couple Republican votes. So what is interesting, what bears watching, there are a few positions. Since you brought up Ambassador Pyatt, first let's see who gets the Assistant Secretary of State for Europe. Right. That's even though for the last 2+ years, President Trump has left that as an acting, that is a Senate confirmable position. That's the person who has direct responsibility for Greece and Cyprus and Turkey. There are names circulating, like I said, that of people who know the issue quite well, who know Greece and Cyprus quite well, but watch who gets that position. That's going to be, when you're talking about who might be the Holbrook, who is going to be the person that intervenes in a crisis, it starts with that person, right? After that person's in place, watch who's going to be the Deputy Assistant Secretary for right under them for Europe. Watch who and what, by the way, Ambassador Pyatt's time. Yeah, I mean, given typical service times, yes, his time should be winding down. We all know, though, that the typical process of career Foreign Service officers kind of bidding for where they want to go, that hasn't opened in terms of Athens. There is some discussion. There are some people saying, oh, let's turn Athens into a political appointment again. So whether Athens stays a position where you get a career Foreign Service officer like Ambassador Pyatt or opens up again, because it once was, to political appointments may decide who we get in Athens. And those are, and the other thing is we may see who may be the U.S. permanent representative to NATO or to the European Union. We know, as we've seen during this crisis with Turkey, that a lot of those discussions are trying to be held at the NATO level, at the EU level. So those 2 appointments also very important. And so there's a lot we got to keep our eye on. Who may be the Commerce Secretary, right? We saw Wilbur Ross being very active, going to Greece, encouraging investment in Greece. Who is going to be the Assistant Secretary at the Pentagon? Again, responsible for Europe. We've seen a growing defense relationship, an expansion of Suda Bay, the Woody Williams expeditionary ship being at Suda Bay. Greece right now signaling that it's going to explore acquisition of the F-35s. So there are at least a couple of handfuls of appointments that we really should be paying attention to, on top of if any Greek Americans make the administration.
Sure. Well, I've always said that some of the best Greek Americans aren't even Greek Americans, and people like Nick Burns come to mind, who's been a true friend of Greece for decades, from his time at the U.S. Embassy. I've got a couple of comments here before we start winding down that I'd like you to address. Yannis Ikonomou's asking, it was written somewhere that there's a diplomatic race as to whether Biden will meet first with Mitsotakis or with Erdogan. Any idea who has the edge on this meeting? Is that important, who Biden sees first in this Greece-Turkey competition?
We can write a lot of things. I don't know that there's a diplomatic race on there. We see, Turkey threatening the U.S. And remember, the Turkey relationship doesn't necessarily, when the U.S. president talks to Turkey, does not necessarily talk about Greece, right? We've seen readout after readout where they'll call Turkey about Syria only, or Turkey about, Nagorno-Karabakh or Armenia. So in terms of race, I would say it probably, if we're talking about the congratulatory phone calls rather than the meeting, right? I don't know which one Yanni is referring to, these calls right now, because I think what was talked about in the article is referring to is who does he call first. As things stand right now, I would expect him to speak to Greece first, right? There's a crisis. There's an EU meeting coming up next week. Turkey's the bad guy in this situation. If something blows up on Turkey's border, right, or it may be Turkey. I don't expect that to happen. So yes, I would expect, and it would be proper signaling by the Biden administration to speak to Kyriakos Mitsotakis first. And if he doesn't, frankly, it would be bad signaling and a disappointment.
So, Endy, I've got a question here that I want to address real fast. It's Nick Anagnostou. This is the same Nick that I know, who's a reader of the Pappas Post and from Australia. Nick, you are coming in late to the discussion. No worries about your apology. Endy and I did speak about the new administration's harder line with Turkey earlier in our call. So once this video ends, the video will be saved on the website. You can just go back and rewind the video and hear what Endy had to say, because he has some interesting.
I can add a couple of things that I didn't address and that bear watching. First of all, there are a few flashpoints that the Trump administration not only avoided but kind of made worse and gave Turkey this sense of immunity. The first being the sanctions over the S-400s, right? There was strong bipartisan, bicameral legislation, CATSA, that Greg has reported on, the Countering America's Adversaries Through Sanctions Act, that required that Turkey be sanctioned for buying S-400s. Now, the State Department tried to be cute about it by saying, well, they bought them but didn't activate them. Then Turkey activated them, but still there were no sanctions. Now, the Biden administration is obviously going to have the authority to do it. There is a possibility, though, that Congress ties even his hands. There is legislation working its way through the end of this Congress, and it may get through, that requires, not only authorizes a president, but requires a president to put the sanctions in. So if this legislation makes it, it may become either one of the final acts that Donald Trump takes as president or one of the first acts that Joe Biden has to take. So we should watch who gets sanctioned and how quickly. The other is the Halkbank, not my Halk, it's with a K, right? The Halkbank case in New York. Halkbank is Turkey's second biggest bank. It was involved in circumventing Iran sanctions. And it's been stuck, and frankly, as much as QAnon conspiracies want to say it was because of deep state reasons, two prosecutors, and including the U.S. attorney, were removed by the Trump administration because they wanted to pursue Halkbank. Right? There's again there's a lot of good right of center reporting on this. Halkbank, if it goes ahead, right, the prosecution, they're in line to get the biggest fine of any foreign bank in U.S. Legal history, and these two cases alone will show that this is a administration that's going to hold Turkey accountable.
Nick Barnetts has just joined us too. He's a longtime reader and a friend that I've spent some time with in Greece. Nick, we did address these direct benefits for Greece and Cyprus earlier in the video. So once we're done, you can just rewind and watch the video. We don't have a lot of time left, and I do want to close the hour with Endy Zemenides, Executive Director of the Hellenic American Leadership Council, with a familiar conversation to both of us. But before I do that, I want to give a shout out to the several hundred people who have supported the Pappas Post with a monthly subscription. I really, really appreciate your efforts. You know, content and news isn't free. It takes time, it takes money to research, to write. I'm a firm believer in not having a paywall on this site. I hate the websites that you log in and you have to pay to continue reading this article. I want my news to be free, and my philosophy is it's usually the people that can't afford to pay for the news that could really benefit from it in the first place. So that said, we have created this support mechanism where people are able to pitch in $5 a month, $10 a month, whatever they can be. I'll give you a link to click the support button, sign up. It's a big help to the work that we do. It enables us to send more researchers out there to publish more historical articles. There's so many archives out there. We just published a wonderful story from 1946 about when the United States of America sent 15,000 animals to rejuvenate the Greek countryside. Well, this article took me 4 months of research, spent lots of time in the Library of Congress, acquiring old photographs like this. I just got this one today that I'm going to be adding. These are wonderful historical archives of our community. I really need your support. So click the button, pappaspost.com/support, $5 a month, price of a cup of coffee, $10 a month. What's even better is when you do support, you get an ad-free experience. So you're not seeing all those annoying advertisements on your browser. So click support. Thank you very much. Before I close with Endy Zemenides,
I want to make a pitch on that too. Since we're talking about politics, to really be involved in politics, civic affairs, you need to be informed. The work that Greg does and the Greek media in general, you know, if we don't support it, we're not going to have reporters. Where I know from when Greg has worked on stories that he has to interview me, this is on all hours of the night. This is when something breaks, you gotta be around. And frankly, you don't know how uninformed you are until the moment Pappas Post and others stop publishing. So let's not get to that point. We have a chance right now to be very informed, to make a great effect on American society, and it requires us to have a press presence. So
thank you, Endy, for the plug. I want to do a quick shout out to Calliope Parthamos, who's watching. Speaking of public service, years of public service, Calliope from Baltimore, thank you for watching. Really, really appreciate your support today. Don't think I didn't notice it. Wink, wink. Endy, let's talk Chicago. We shared a breaking news story this morning from Shia Kapos from Politico's Illinois Playbook, which got me very excited. Let me get my Alexei Janulius pin out again. Now, this is from his state treasurer pin. I do have somewhere in my collection an Alexei Janulius for Senate when he ran unsuccessfully against Mark Kirk. which was a very spirited campaign. The one thing I remember most about that campaign is, and it was an ugly campaign. It got really ugly. It got really personal. But I remember the day after the election, watching Alexei and Mark Kirk sit down and have coffee together, and that to me,
beer at the Billy Goat.
coffee, right? That to me is why I was so saddened by the outcome, why I continue to be saddened by why we have such a crybaby and just such a horrible representation of what our political system is in the White House today. I'm saddened, not because I disagree or whatever. I'm saddened that we haven't had the transition that this country deserves. The courts have spoken, the leaders have spoken, the lawyers have spoken, and this man has not given the citizens of this country the dignity that our country deserves. And Alexei and Mark Kirk's dignity, way back in 2000 and when they sat down and had a beer, after screaming at each other, after yelling at each other, after insulting each other's families, they sat down and had a beer, and Alexei became one of his supporters in the Congress. And Alexei gave him some tips and gave him some pointers on how to handle certain Greek issues, because I was in Chicago at the time. Speaking of Alexei Giannoulias, super excited that Shia Kapos announced today that he is considering throwing his hat in the ring for the position of Secretary of State in Illinois. We saw the significance of what secretaries of state do. They're clearly not just state offices anymore. They safeguard our national elections, as we saw in Atlanta and Wisconsin, Michigan, and other states. And we've got about 3 minutes to go. I want you to talk to us about Alexei, what he's planning, what he's thinking, why Secretary of State, maybe not something more national, member of a seat in Congress or another Senate run. Is it just because this was what was opening? Is it because he wants to stay local? Talk to us a little bit about Alexei and how excited, not just I am, but many people. I got dozens and dozens of text messages today from when we first published that article.
Sure. So, as you said, Alexei left public office 10 years ago, but he didn't leave public life. People forget that. I mean, my favorite speech in his whole political career was his concession speech. It wasn't written. He didn't write a concession speech because he wasn't expecting to give one. He spoke from the heart, and he said, this was never about me, right? This was about going and doing something. And he always said, I want to do something and not be something. And I'll tell you, over the last 10 years, he served as chairman of the community colleges in the state of Illinois. And we don't have enough time for me to tell you the stuff he does. He's presently on the board of the Chicago Public Libraries. He served on the board of 1 Million Degrees with former Secretary of Education Arne Duncan, trying to get kids off the street and into community colleges. He serves on the board of CARA, this great organization that, again, gets homeless people off the street, helps them reshape their lives, get some job interviews. Very inspiring. And he is stating, obviously involved. He's had leadership roles in HALC. He's from our philanthropic end to our political causes. He got fired up like you did with President Trump. This year, he was part of a super PAC effort called Really American and ran ads in Pennsylvania and Georgia and Florida, internet ads. He got, like you said, fired up about election protection issues. He has one of Alexei's early issues, even though it didn't have something to do with state treasurer's office, was expanding the ability to vote. Illinois, as you remember, when you came to vote, was you had to come up with a million excuses why you needed to vote by mail. We made it a vote by mail state. There was no early voting. Now there's a month of early voting. Early voting was only at one location. Now it's around the city. The fact is that he very much believes we all feel like we have a say and we have some skin in the game. So I think a big part is getting to vote. He saw attempts at voter suppression, attempts to keep even people from registering. The Illinois Secretary of State doesn't have as expansive election powers as, for example, the Georgia Secretary of State, but it does voter registration, certifications, all of that, and he would be a voice. And I think it is mostly the integrity of our democracy, but also making people believe that government works for you, right? Again, you know this because there's no other office like the Secretary of State that almost every Illinois citizen has to deal with it. Whether you're getting a license or registering the Greek America Foundation or registering your LLC to own a piece of real estate, or if you're getting swindled by a stockbroker, all those people are going to deal with the Secretary of State. I would almost bet that it's the one office that everybody in the state has dealt with. It has offices all over the state, and it's a place where, you know, we need to, if we're going to restore trust in government, it starts. You know, Secretary of State can play a big role. And, you know, that kind of has, this is an aside, this is not what he's thinking, but if you look at which countries did best in battling the coronavirus, it didn't matter whether they were Western or Asian democracies or in some cases dictatorships. It was places that had a very good working bureaucracy and trust in government. Mm-hmm. And I think Alexei really, he sees that, and he knows that he can help on both those fronts through the Secretary of State's office.
Well, I know you're in regular contact with Alexei. I shot him a text message this morning to tell him that I officially endorsed him too. Not that my endorsement means anything to him, but anybody that knows Alexei and the Janulius family, you know, and Alexei doesn't really need to do this. He's successful. He's built numerous businesses. I told him he needs another political office like he needs a hole in his head. But what you said is exactly right. Alexei's true mission, as long as I've known him, has been to serve. And he sees it as his calling. So I'm thrilled. Perhaps I'll make a temporary move back to Chicago, volunteer for the Janulius campaign. Who knows? I do have to wrap up. We've got a couple minutes over. I want to wrap up by telling everybody that my next live show will be Thursday evening, same time, 8 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. I'm super excited. I'm giving you 48 hours to binge watch Blood of Zeus. I am going to be with Volas and Charlie and a couple special guests from the show. It's the new Netflix anime show, Blood of Zeus, based on Greek mythology. I'm going to be with the creators of the series. The series has been trending on Netflix for several weeks now, ever since it launched. It's getting a lot of national press. I am going to be live with Charlie and Vlas Parlapanides and two very special guests that I'm keeping as a surprise. You'll have to watch. Endy, thank you for helping me kick off my live. This won't be the last time you'll be on. I will tell you, of all of my live shows that I've had, if you go to my YouTube channel, you can see the one you were on the last time has been my most viewed one. So you do seem to bring out the fireworks in people. I think people are very passionate about our politics, or they just like to come and see your shiny head. So,
well, I'll leave with this. We are entering the bicentennial of Greece. And remember, it was a Greek diaspora from all across Europe that made such a difference. We have a chance to do the same starting in 2021. And if you want to do something today to make a commitment for that, subscribe to the Pappas Post so you can be really informed when we kick off.
Launch, and also support the work of organizations like the Hellenic American Leadership Council. I've put the link in the comments, and we are only as strong as the community that supports us. You're exactly right. Thank you all for watching. Endy Zemenides, Executive Director of the Hellenic American Leadership Council. Thank you for joining me. I'll see you all again Thursday evening, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, with the creators of Blood of Zeus.